So the Vienna Secession was characterized by a group of about 18 people led by the artist Gustav Klimt. You may know him as the creator of The Kiss. They decided that the two major artistic organizations in Vienna at the time were a little bit out of date and not keeping up to speed with what was happening at the time. So these two organizations were called the Vienna Academy of the Arts and the Genossenschaft Bildender Künstler Wiens. So those two organizations led to the secession style, which is another word for the Jugendstil or the Art Nouveau. The secessionists' primary goal was getting their work out there, creating their own exhibition space, which they would call the Künstlerhaus. So this translates to the House of the Artists. This movement included painters, sculptors, and architects. So something important to keep in mind is not only were there different media that were employed during this time period, this also didn't create so much a style as it does explain a period of time. The motto of the secessionists was Der Zeit ihre Kunst, der Kunst ihre Freiheit. And this means to every age it's art, to art it's freedom. So their basic goal, their mission statement was to explore possibilities of art outside the tradition or the conservative mentalities of the time. Like other artists from this Art Nouveau movement, they were not trying to emulate historical influence in any way. However, they did have a lot in common. They sort of revered mythology. And an example that the book gives of this is when the Oedipus complex, which was created by by Sigmund Freud to explain the psychological concept. So did this poster for the first exhibition of the secession. This contained Athena, who is the goddess of wisdom, and the struggle of Theseus with the Minotaur. So this image is very obviously like a lot of detail on the around the edges, but then we also have this large open space in the middle. As you can see in the secession building itself, you're seeing another example of the very intricate pieces juxtaposed with these open planes of pure color. So we're also going to see right here the repeated phrase ver sacrum, which means sacred spring. So this was another kind of motif among the art of this time. This building was designed by Josef Maria Olbrich, and this was in 1898. And this was the exhibition space that was hopefully going to be put on the Ringstrasse, which is more popular place at the time, more fashionable, more cosmopolitan, but instead it wound up at the Karlsplatz street. This building became known as Die Secession, which was more or less an icon of the movement, and this displayed work from all the other famous artists, Eugene Grasset, Charles Rennie Mackintosh, Arnold Böcklin, Max Klinger. This was the perfect house for the rebellious group of artists during the secession. One of the main principles of the secessionists was the idea of a Gesamtkunstwerk, which means sort of a complete work of art, a total, a universal artwork. This means that they were hoping to have all the aesthetic outlets become into one style. So this was a very well-rounded and completed sense of artwork. It started with theater, but in the sense of architecture, when you were employing the principle of Gesamtkunstwerk, you would take note of designing a building that had coordinating accessories, furnishings, and landscaping to complement the original piece of artwork. So everything would work together to create a whole, and you'd kind of be immersed in this style. Again, we're seeing that people are trying to do everything that they can to escape the industrialist society. They're trying to create entire states of being surrounded by beautifying and contrasting what they're seeing in their industrial life. Gesamtkunstwerk was also employed in the magazine, the official magazine of the secessionists called Vers Sacrum. So this would have everything to do with the font, to the illustrations, to the any ornamentation, anything that could unify the entire magazine even more, they would go ahead and employ. This cover is by Coleman Moser. This is the second issue. This looks very similar to the Japanese prints. You're seeing the femininity and the ornamentation, the views of the face, the very feminine softness here, and lots of black lines and geometric but organic shapes. What's also kind of funny about this is that the magazine was shaped in a square format, which perhaps alludes to the secessionist building itself and how they had the 4 panels on the outside. Similar to the Scottish movement in Art Nouveau, the Viennese also wanted to establish their identity as being Viennese. They wanted to be Austrian, they wanted to really identify their own specific art style and not be dependent on the established community around them. So this is one of the most experimental magazines at the time. This is similar to the art magazines or the zines, the independently published things that you'll see today. And here are a couple secessionist posters. The one on the left by Coleman Moser, and this one is very similar in design, like especially with the circle up here, to the Scottish Art Nouveau style, but whereas the Scottish ones were more sensual and they were trying to kind of sneak in some sexual imagery in there, these are definitely more geometric and non-sexual and a little bit more blocky. So you'll see the same plinth at the bottom where all the text is, although it is very stylized, almost a little bit difficult to read. If you look at the Österreich, you almost can't make out what it's saying. The umlaut is within the O, so it's just a little bit different. So they were starting to see like them playing around with text a little bit more. And then on the poster on the right, it's also more geometric than we're used to seeing, although the S's, the curves here are suggestive of the curves in the figures in the Scottish artwork, but there's definitely more geometry here. You're seeing this look like a pure block, and these are just rows. These also look very, very like they're put into a box. So you just took a shape and you have the letter fill it out entirely. So they're just kind of taking things to a new level here. And it's really obvious that these images are devoid of the symbols and the mythology and the allegories that were making up the previous Art Nouveau styles that we've been seeing. The Wiener Werkstatt, which means the Viennese workshops, was a crafts organization created by Joseph Hoffmann as well as Moser. So this was around 1903, and this was an organization designed to create crafts including furniture design, architecture, textile design, metalworking, bookbinding, graphic designing, as well as industrial projects. So they were essentially trying to reflect the spirit of their times through their clothing, their language, their jewelry, their furniture, their architecture, the interior design. However, sadly, within the next couple of years, there would be people arguing that painting was only the purest form of design available, and that crafts were not meriting such esteem in the artistic world. This is one of the logos that was created, and of course, the two W's are within a square, and the square was so prominent in their works that it became referred to as the Quadratl Hoffmann. And the importance of having themselves branded was that they were hoping to make a living off of their designs, that they were supposed to be elevated into a higher status because of them. So again, this set of flatware, designed by Josef Hoffmann in 1904, was another example of something within the same squarish style. Although these look really, really cool, they're probably not the most practical silverware set to eat with, and they may have not even been tested out. And again, we're seeing that though these objects were designed with the idea in mind that everyday people would use these to become a part of their life, they wound up being expensive to produce, and such care was put into the design that once again they fell into the hands of the wealthiest people. So in contrast to the geometric orderly pieces of the Art Nouveau style was the German Expressionist style, which was meant to evoke the feelings and the emotions and the expressions rather than be focused on appearance. So this is before the First World War occurred, and this was also a field that worked its way into architecture, painting, and movies. This movement was largely isolated to Germany itself, and these designs weren't necessarily intended to be simplistic. So with these, the idea was to exaggerate, to overstate. You can see like these very adamant, thick lines around the image. These are very bold in your face. He's meant to evoke um, imagery of Jesus by poking at a wound right here in his chest. So we're seeing a lot of anger here. He shaved his head that year to label himself as an outcast. He's trying to show vulnerability, emotion, pain, and suffering. Very bold, very definite use of color. And this image was just designed to show a pure rawness to it. Egon Schiele was a protege of Gustav Klimt, and he did a lot of figurative work. He had a very screwed up background as a child, and a lot of the anger and emotions came out through his work. He identified a lot with the psychological work that Freud was doing at the time. So he has a lot of rawness, and here a lot of distorted and exaggerated features of the face. In this image, you can see that the face is actually red. This was meant to be an advertisement for a music festival, but the image seems to have not much to do with that. He wound up also going to the Kunstgewerbeschule because he decided that he didn't really have as much of an interest in academia. A lot of people had difficulty looking at his artwork because of the rawness and the grotesqueness and the sexuality involved in it. It was a little bit more controversial, and in some ways it was a little bit disturbing. A lot of these works were less about displaying or beautifying the outside world. They were more about representing what was happening internally, inside people's psyche, inside their emotions. This is also an image that evokes a biblical nature. It's supposed to emulate Saint Sebastian. And here you see a very uncomfortable position. The body is contorted in an almost unnatural way, almost a little bit uncomfortable to look at when you're imagining the positioning involved. It's definitely meant to make the viewer sympathize with or empathize with the pain that is felt during this image. But all in all, you can still see the influence of the Art Nouveau style. You can see the text, the blockiness to it. You're also seeing the Japanese influence, the colors, the flatness, the bold outlines. So as we're seeing, Art Nouveau is taking on many different shapes and styles while still being considered part of the movement. And this actually is Expressionism, but it came directly having roots in Art Nouveau.